Jake was a quiet man who lived on the edge of a small town. His cabin stood alone at the edge of the woods, far away from the busy roads and the noise of the town. He loved the solitude, the peace, and the silence that surrounded him. His life was simple. He spent most of his days working with his hands, repairing things, and reading books in the evenings by the fire. The world outside felt too loud, too crowded for him. So he had created his own world here, a world where he could be himself. One chilly morning in early autumn, Jake was walking through the woods near his cabin. The air was crisp and fresh, and the ground was covered in a blanket of fallen leaves. It was a peaceful walk, the kind that Jake usually enjoyed. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath his boots and the soft rustle of branches in the wind. He liked to lose himself in these moments, away from the world and all its noise. But that day was different. As Jake walked, he heard something unusual, a faint rustling coming from a small grove of trees ahead. At first, he thought it was a deer or perhaps a small animal looking for food. But when he approached the grove, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Lying in the middle of the grove was a small creature, its fur matted and covered in dirt. It was trembling, its body weak and fragile. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like anything he had seen before. It was small, about the size of a rabbit, but its eyes were large and strangely human-like, filled with fear and pain. The creature's breathing was shallow, and it looked as if it had been through something terrible. Without thinking, Jake crouched down beside it. His hands gently touched its fur, feeling the warmth of its body, and his heart went out to it. He wasn't sure what kind of creature it was, but in that moment, all he knew was that it was hurt, and it needed help. "Hey there, little one," Jake whispered softly. He didn't know if the creature could understand him, but he hoped his voice would calm it. It looked up at him with those big eyes, and Jake felt a strange connection, as though it understood his words. He carefully lifted the creature into his arms, cradling it like a fragile newborn. Its tiny body shivered in his hands, and Jake could feel the warmth of its breath against his skin. He took the creature back to his cabin, his mind racing. He wasn't a vet, but he had experience with animals, and he knew how to care for the injured. He made a small bed for it in a corner of the cabin, wrapping it in soft blankets to keep it warm. He fed it some water and a bit of food, though the creature didn't seem to have much of an appetite. It just stared at him, those large eyes watching every move he made. Jake spent the rest of the day keeping watch over the creature. As night fell, he built a fire in the hearth and sat by it, his eyes on the small creature. He had no idea what it was or where it had come from, but he couldn't just leave it out there in the woods to die. It had to be something special, something that needed his help. The creature began to stir as the hours passed. It made soft sounds like it was trying to speak, but it wasn't able to form words. Jake gently stroked its head, and the creature calmed down. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a sense of responsibility for it. It was as if the universe had brought it to him for a reason. Days passed, and Jake continued to care for the little creature. It started to grow stronger, though it still seemed fragile. It had a strange way of moving, like it wasn't quite used to its own body, but Jake didn't mind. He would help it adjust. He began to talk to it more, telling it about his life, his quiet cabin in the woods, and how he had never really felt at home in the world. The creature would listen, its eyes following him, as if it understood every word. There was something almost human in the way it looked at him, a kind of knowingness. Jake found himself talking to it more than he had talked to anyone in years. It felt like a connection, an unspoken bond between them. Then one evening, as Jake was preparing dinner, he turned around to find the creature standing on its tiny feet. It was no longer lying on the blankets, but standing, looking at him with an intense gaze. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The creature's eyes were different, clearer, as though it was seeing the world through a new set of eyes. It moved toward him slowly, with more grace than it had shown before. Jake stepped back, unsure of what was happening. Was it the creature's health improving, or was there something more to it? The creature's small body began to glow softly, a faint light radiating from within. Jake's heart raced. This was no ordinary animal. Something strange was happening, something beyond his understanding. As Jake watched, the creature's form began to change. Its body elongated, its fur disappeared, replaced by smooth golden skin that shimmered in the dim light of the cabin. Its size grew, its body becoming taller, more graceful. Its once tiny face transformed into something undeniably human, though still holding a faint trace of its alien origins. Jake couldn't believe his eyes. The creature he had rescued had somehow transformed into a beautiful alien girl. Her eyes remained the same, large and filled with wonder, but now they were even more striking, more intense. She stood there, looking at him, as if she had no idea who or what she had become. Jake stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain: his life had just changed forever. Jake couldn't take his eyes off her. The creature that had once been small, fragile, and full of fear was now standing before him, transformed into a stunning, graceful alien girl. Her skin shimmered softly in the dim light of the cabin, and her eyes, though still large and filled with wonder, now held a depth that Jake couldn't understand. She wasn't the same creature he had found in the woods. She was something more. The girl knew. The being looked at Jake with a mix of confusion and curiosity. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to make sense of the world around her. Her hands, delicate and elegant, moved cautiously, exploring her new form, touching her arms, her face and her hair, which had grown long and silken. There was an air of innocence about her, as if she had just woken up from a long dream and was seeing everything for the first time. Jake took a step closer, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. Was this some kind of alien being? Had he somehow brought her back to life, or was this a mistake? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just leave her alone in this state. She needed him just as much as she had needed his help when she was an injured creature. Are you all right? Jake asked softly, not sure if she could understand him. The girl blinked, her gaze fixed on him. Then, slowly she spoke, her voice soft and melodic, like the hum of wind through the trees. It was a language Jake didn't understand, but the tone was clear. She was trying to communicate. Her words were foreign, but her expression told a different story. She looked lost, like she didn't know where she was or what had happened. Jake's heart went out to her. She was trying so hard to make sense of the world, and here he was, a man who had never been great with people, trying to figure out how to help her. The least he could do was stay calm and not panic. "I don't know what's happening, but I'll help you," Jake said, his voice steady despite the confusion swirling inside him. He gently placed a hand on her arm, careful not to startle her. She flinched at first, but then relaxed under his touch. She stared at him, as if trying to understand the meaning behind his words. It was clear she couldn't speak his language, but her eyes held something else, a sense of trust. She was putting her faith in him, even though neither of them knew what to expect next. Jake realized that she needed more than just care. She needed answers, and so did he. But for now, he could offer her safety. He led her to the small table in the cabin and gestured for her to sit down. She complied without question, her movements still awkward, as if she wasn't fully used to her new form. Jake watched her closely. She looked like a human in many ways, yet there was something undeniably alien about her. Her skin was glowing, her features were more delicate, and her movements, though graceful, were different from any human he had ever seen. Her eyes, though, were the most striking. They were large and bright, filled with an intelligence that seemed to peer into the very depths of his soul. He sat across from her, unsure of what to say next. It was as if they were both caught in a strange moment, trying to bridge the gap. between two worlds that didn't seem to belong together. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. Should he ask her questions? Would she even understand? Can you understand me? Jake asked, his voice gentle but firm. The girl's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, it seemed like she was thinking hard, processing his words. She gave a small nod, the first sign of recognition. Jake breathed a sigh of relief. At least she could understand him. He reached for a glass of water on the table and held it out to her. She hesitated for a moment, but then took the glass in her hands. Her fingers were long and graceful, like they had been designed for something more than just simple tasks. She lifted the glass to her lips and took a careful sip, her eyes never leaving Jake's. There was a quiet understanding between them, even if neither of them knew the full truth of what was happening. Do you have a name? Jake asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. The girl's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't considered that question before. She opened her mouth, but the words that came out were foreign again. It wasn't a language Jake knew, and it didn't sound like anything he had ever heard before. She looked down at her hands, as if searching for something. She muttered a few more words, her voice soft, almost pleading. Jake couldn't make sense of it, but he could see the frustration in her eyes. She wanted to communicate, but she didn't know how. Jake felt a pang of sympathy. He wanted to help, to make things easier for her, but he didn't know how. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It wasn't much, but maybe it could help bridge the gap. He opened the translation app and showed her the screen, typing in the words. What is your name? The girl looked at the phone for a moment, then back at Jake. She hesitated, her eyes searching the room as if trying to remember something important. Finally, she spoke again, her voice slow and deliberate. Lara, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Lyra. It was a simple name, but it felt right. He smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. At least they were starting to make progress. He typed the name into the phone and showed it to her. Lyra, he said, nodding. That's a beautiful name. Lyra looked at him with a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She didn't fully understand the words, but she understood the tone. She gave a small smile, and for the first time, Jake felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to communicate, to understand each other. But Jake knew there was more to this than just a strange encounter. Lyra wasn't just an alien who had transformed in front of him. She was something more, something important. And whatever that was, it was only the beginning of a much bigger mystery. Days passed, and Jake found himself growing more and more curious about Lyra. She was unlike anything he had ever encountered, yet there was something comforting about her presence. Her transformation from a small creature to an alien girl was still a mystery, but Jake was starting to feel like he might be the key to helping her find answers. Lyra had begun to adjust to life on Earth, though it wasn't easy. She still struggled with human customs, and the world around her was overwhelming. Every time Jake showed her something new, how to use a spoon, how to sit in a chair, how to talk, she absorbed it with wide eyes, as though she was experiencing everything for the first time. Jake was patient with her, taking it one step at a time. She had a natural grace, though she was still clumsy at times. She would often smile when she got something right, and Jake couldn't help but smile back. He found himself becoming more attached to her, protective even. But he also knew that there were many things he didn't understand about her. One evening, after a long day of teaching Lyra about simple human activities, Jake sat by the fire, feeling the warmth spread through the cabin. Lyra sat across from him, watching the flames flicker. She had been silent for a while, and Jake wondered what was going on in her mind. Are you okay? Jake asked, breaking the silence. Lyra turned her gaze to him. She didn't answer immediately, but Jake could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was struggling with something, he could tell. I'm confused, she said finally, her voice soft and almost hesitant. The words were broken, not quite right, but Jake understood her meaning. Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concern. What's wrong? Lyra paused, her eyes wandering to the fire. I don't understand how I became this, she said. I was something else. Something small, and now I don't know who I am. Jake's heart went out to her. He could see the pain in her eyes. She was lost, just as much as he was in all of this. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. Lyra needed help. She couldn't be left to figure this out on her own. You're not alone, Jake said gently. I'm here. We'll figure it out together. Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, trust maybe. She nodded slowly, her face still clouded with uncertainty. But Jake saw a small hint of relief in her gaze. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe that he could help her. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra spent more time together, talking, learning, and sharing. Jake took her on walks in the woods, showing her the beauty of nature. He explained simple things like the sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the way animals moved through the trees. Lyra listened intently, her large eyes absorbing everything. Though she didn't speak much, Jake could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was processing everything, trying to understand. One afternoon, while walking through the woods, Jake noticed something odd. Lyra was walking beside him, but her gaze was fixed on something in the distance. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. Jake followed her gaze and saw a glimmer of light near the horizon. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. What is that? Jake muttered to himself, more to see if Lyra had noticed it too. He didn't expect her to respond, but to his surprise, Lyra stopped dead in her tracks. She was staring at the light, her eyes wide with recognition. Jake turned to her, noticing the sudden tension in her body. What's wrong? Jake asked, his voice low. Lyra took a step back, her breathing quickening. It's them, she whispered, almost to herself. The ones who did this to me. Jake's heart raced. Who? He asked urgently. Who did this? Lyra didn't answer right away. She was still staring at the light, as if it were pulling her in. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and Jake could see the fear building in her. Something in her was telling her that whoever or whatever was out there was coming for her. Jake took a step closer to her. Lyra, you're safe here. They can't get to you. But Lyra shook her head slowly. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. They've been tracking me. I'm not supposed to be here. Jake's mind raced. Who are they? Why would they be tracking you? Lyra didn't answer, but Jake could see that she was terrified. He reached for her arm, trying to comfort her, but she pulled away quickly. I have to go, she said, her voice frantic. They'll come for me. They'll come for both of us. Jake grabbed her wrist, holding her in place. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Lyra's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Jake saw something he hadn't seen before, determination. She wasn't the helpless creature she had been when he first found her. She had changed. She was strong. And she wasn't going to let anyone control her. I have to face them, she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. I have to stop them before they come any closer. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of facing whatever danger Lyra had been running from terrified him. But he couldn't let her face it alone. He didn't know what this them was, but he knew he couldn't let Lyra go through it without him. You don't have to do this alone, Jake said, his voice steady. I'm with you. We'll face them together. Lyra's expression softened for a moment. She looked at Jake, her eyes full of gratitude. But there was something else there too, something darker. Whatever was coming, It was going to be worse than anything they had faced before. "We have to get ready," Lyra sighed, her voice barely a whisper. "They won't stop until they find me." Jake nodded, his heart pounding. The calm days of teaching and learning were over. Now they were about to face a threat neither of them could fully understand. And the unknown danger that Lyra had been hiding from was getting closer. The standoff in the woods felt like it had stretched into eternity. Jake stood just behind Lyra, his breath shallow, his pulse hammering in his chest. The tall, armored figures were now fully aware of her presence. The moment they had seen her, everything had changed. These beings weren't here for peace. They were here to take something, or someone. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter in the darkness, a soft, ethereal light that contrasted with the dark silhouettes of the soldiers. She stood her ground, unwavering. Jake's hand clenched around a small weapon she had shown him earlier, but it felt useless. He had no experience with this kind of fight. He was just a man, standing next to an alien warrior who had already seen too much of the pain her people had caused. "Lyra," one of the soldiers spoke, his voice distorted through the helmet. "You cannot hide from us any longer." Jake's grip tightened around the weapon as he stepped closer to Lyra, instinctively wanting to protect her. But she didn't need his protection. She was the one with the power, the one who had faced horrors far beyond what Jake could imagine. "We've been looking for you," the soldier continued, his tone cold and commanding. "You were not meant to survive. You are an experiment, a failure, and now you will be returned to us." Lyra's eyes narrowed, and Jake could feel the air around them grow heavy with tension. She didn't speak, but her posture said everything. She wasn't going back, not without a fight. And Jake knew she wasn't going to give up without a fight either. "They failed you," Jake said quietly, stepping forward slightly. His voice was steady, but deep inside, he could feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about Lyra anymore. This was about everything he had come to understand about her, and the strange bond they had formed in such a short time. "And now they want to take you back? For what? To continue doing whatever they were doing to you?" The soldier's head tilted, as if considering Jake's words. Then, without warning, he reached for his weapon, the motion swift and sure. Lyra's gaze snapped to him, and in an instant, she raised her hand. Jake blinked as the air around them seemed to shimmer. A burst of energy, like a wave of invisible force, shot from Lyra's outstretched palm. The soldier's body was sent flying backward, crashing into the trees with a sickening thud. His weapon clattered to the ground, far out of reach. The other soldiers reacted immediately, drawing their own weapons, but it was clear they weren't prepared for what they were facing. Lyra had power beyond anything they could understand. "Go!" Lyra shouted, turning to Jake, her voice filled with urgency. "They'll send more. We need to get to the cabin." Jake hesitated for a fraction of a second. He wasn't ready to run, but Lyra was already moving. She didn't wait for him to catch up. The moment the soldiers had been thrown back, she was in motion, faster than he had ever seen her move before. Jake followed, his legs pounding against the dirt as he ran. His mind raced. The cabin, their safe place, was now a target. But there was no time to think. He had to trust Lyra. The woods blurred around them. The only sound the rush of their footsteps and the distant crackle of the soldiers' communication devices. Jake could hear their voices shouting, ordering reinforcements to secure the area, but it didn't matter. Lyra was leading them to safety, and for now, that was all that mattered. They reached the cabin just as the first wave of soldiers began to approach. Lyra slammed the door shut behind them, bolting it quickly. Jake turned around, breathless, and found her standing at the center of the cabin, her chest rising and falling with exertion, but her eyes fierce with determination. "They'll be coming for us," she said, her voice tight. "But we have a chance to stop them. We just need to keep moving." Jake nodded, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The strain of fighting was starting to show, and he knew that she wasn't invincible. Even with all her power, she was still only one person. She had been alone for so long. She had been hiding, running from enemies who had never stopped hunting her. And now, those enemies were here. The cabin felt small now, the walls closing in on them as they waited for the inevitable. Jake turned to the small stash of weapons Lyra had set aside, pulling one of the energy rifles from the shelf. It was strange, alien technology, but it was their only chance. He loaded it quickly, glancing over at Lyra. "We need a plan," Jake said, his voice low but steady. "We can't just wait for them to break through. We need to go on the offensive." Lyra's gaze met his, and for a moment, the two of them shared a silent understanding. She was stronger, more capable, but Jake was the one who had fought on Earth. He knew how to survive. He knew how to make a plan when everything felt out of control. "We'll fight," Lyra said, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I won't let them take me again. I'll end this once and for all." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know exactly what she meant by that, but he could see the fire in her eyes. There was something in her past, something she hadn't told him yet, that made this fight personal. And if she was going to end it, they would have to give everything they had. "We'll end this together," Jake said, his hand gripping the energy rifle tightly. "But I'm not leaving your side. Not now, not ever." Lyra's lips curled into a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "But we need to keep moving. They're already at the door." Before Jake could say anything more, the door began to shake. Heavy footsteps echoed from the outside, and a low growl of machinery whirred to life. They were coming. Lyra raised her hand, her eyes glowing once more. Jake braced himself, the rifle aimed at the door. The time for running was over. Now it was time to fight. The soldiers had underestimated them. They thought they were just a girl and a man. But Lyra had proven that she was much more. And together they were unstoppable. The door burst open, and the battle began. The door exploded inward with a deafening crash, sending splinters of wood flying into the room. The first soldier was through the doorway, his helmet reflecting the dim light of the cabin. Behind him, more soldiers poured in, their weapons raised, ready to overwhelm Lyra and Jake. Lyra didn't hesitate. With a fluid movement, she raised her hand, and a burst of energy shot out from her palm, slamming into the soldier at the front. He was thrown backward, crashing into the others behind him. Jake's heart raced as he watched Lyra's power unfold. But there was no time to marvel at it. He had to act. Jake fired the energy rifle, the weapon humming to life as it discharged a blast of blue light. One of the soldiers in the back staggered and fell, his body jerking from the force of the shot. But they kept coming. There were too many of them. "Stay close," Lyra shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She moved swiftly, her body a blur as she took out another soldier with a precise strike of energy. Jake kept his focus, moving quickly to cover Lyra's back. The cabin, once a place of peace and safety, had become a battlefield. He had never imagined himself fighting aliens in his own home, but there was no turning back now. These soldiers weren't just after Lyra. They were after both of them. The soldiers were relentless, pushing forward, their armored bodies almost unshakable. Jake could see the desperation in their eyes, but they weren't ready for what Lyra could do. She moved like a force of nature, her energy blast striking with pinpoint accuracy. But even she was beginning to tire. Jake could see the strain on her face, the way her movements slowed for just a fraction of a second. They were outnumbered. And that was starting to show. One of the soldiers got too close, reaching out to grab Lyra. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Jake's instincts kicked in. He dropped the rifle and rushed forward, throwing himself between Lyra and the soldier. His body collided with the soldier's, knocking him off balance. The soldier snarled, swinging his weapon toward Jake. But Lyra was faster. She unleashed another wave of energy, sending the soldier flying across the room. "Jake, get back!" Lyra shouted, her voice urgent, but Jake was already back on his feet, grabbing his rifle again. There was no time to waste. They couldn't keep fighting like this forever. They needed to end it. Jake fired again, his hand shaking slightly as the blast hit its target. The remaining soldiers paused, seemingly surprised by the sudden shift in momentum. Lyra took a step forward, her eyes glowing with renewed strength. She was ready. "We need to go," Lyra said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline that had to be coursing through her. "I can't hold them off forever." Jake nodded, feeling a chill run down his spine. He knew she was right. They had to leave now, before reinforcements arrived. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back door. But just as they were about to escape, a new sound reached their ears. The low hum of a ship's engines filled the air, growing louder by the second. Lyra froze, her eyes scanning the sky outside. "They've called for backup," she muttered, her face hardening. "We don't have much time." Jake's mind raced. He had no plan, no backup. Just him and Lyra against a whole fleet of soldiers. He had no idea how to fight something like this. But one thing was clear: if they stayed here, they would be overwhelmed. "Get to the woods," Lyra said, her voice filled with urgency. "We can't fight them here. We have to move." Jake grabbed his pack from the corner of the room, slinging it over his shoulder. He didn't hesitate. Lyra was right. Their only chance was to get to the woods and disappear into the trees. But the thought of running was hard. He had never run from a fight before. And now, running felt like the only way to survive. Together, they sprinted out the back door, into the night. The woods stretched out before them, dark and silent. The only sounds were their feet hitting the ground and the distant roar of the ship engines. As they ran deeper into the woods, Jake felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting for survival. For Lyra, he had promised her that he would stand by her, and he wasn't going to break that promise now. They reached the edge of the woods, but the sound of the ships grew louder. Lyra stopped, her eyes scanning the sky, searching for something. Jake's breath came in sharp gasps, his body aching from the effort. But he didn't stop. "Not now. There's a place up ahead," Lyra said, her voice sharp with urgency. "We can hide there." Jake followed her without question, his mind focused on one thing: getting out of sight. He could hear the ships now, their engines roaring as they descended into the forest. The soldiers weren't far behind, and Jake knew that they couldn't keep running forever. They reached a small clearing, a place Lyra had clearly known well. It was hidden by trees, and from this vantage point, they could see the ships overhead, but they were hidden from view. Lyra dropped to the ground, kneeling beside a large rock. She motioned for Jake to do the same. "We need to stay quiet," she whispered. "They'll pass over us, but if we're not careful, they'll spot us." Jake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. They stayed low, barely breathing, as the ships flew overhead. The sound was deafening, but they remained still, not daring to make a sound. Time seemed to stretch on forever as they waited, hidden in the shadows of the trees. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ships moved on, their engines fading into the distance. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But Lyra didn't relax. She remained alert, her eyes scanning the area. "We're not safe yet," she said quietly. "We need to move again." Jake nodded, standing up. He was exhausted, but he wouldn't stop now. They couldn't. They had come too far, and whatever was waiting for them in the future, he was ready to face it with Lyra by his side. Together, they disappeared into the night, ready to face whatever came next.